Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I do appreciate you being with me. Let me please ask you to hit the subscribe button. As I've shared with you before, trying to get my subscriptions up to 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year, 2025. That's my goal. You are the ones who will make it happen. And I want to thank you for all of the private messages concerning our study of the feast days. Now, we've been going on for a good little while now, and I understand that. And I got to say this it's absolutely hilarious of people who, number one, have no knowledge of the importance of the feast days. That's more than obvious in many of their comments. Number two, they have zero ability to refute what I'm presenting to you from the scriptures about Sukkot and about the feast days. And so what do? This happened, and of course I film on Sunday mornings, but this happened yesterday. This one guy in a very, very snide comment, well, I guess Preston will make 1,322 or whatever the number he gave was. I have no idea, I've forgotten. But anyway, some ridiculous number. I guess Preston will make, all of these videos trying to explain everything. And I just couldn't help but laugh because this individual has made not one single substantive argument, not one. Hasn't even tried to do an exegesis of Scripture. Not one. So all he can do is make snide remarks about how many videos I make. I've got this saying, you've heard me say it. Folks, ridicule is not refutation. Nope. No substantive, no probative value. It's worthless. And it simply exposes the person and their own inability to answer what I'm saying. Okay, with that said, we've been focused, pardon me, we've been focused on Sukkot, the last, next to the last, however you wish to pronounce that or state that, of Sukkot, the last of Israel's feast days, and its incredible eschatological significance. It was the Feast of Harvest, the Feast of Ingathering, the Feast of the Joy of the Nations, the Feast of the Turning of the Seasons, turning of the year. Many different descriptions were given to it. The most important for us to determine or to examine has been and is, when would the harvest, i.e. the resurrection, that Sukkot foreshadowed and typified, when would that harvest take place? Well, the great majority of Christianity says, well, that's at the end of the Christian age. That's at the end of time. Folks, this is really problematic. Sukkot happened under the law. Sukkot foreshadowed the harvest at the end of Israel's age. It was her harvest, after all. And so to suggest that Christ was the first fruit, literally first fruit of the first fruit, 1 Corinthians 15:19 and following, which is to say that Christ was the first fruit of the resurrection, and that occurred under the Old Covenant law, under the Old Covenant age, and then to extrapolate and say, oh, well, yeah, the harvest, the actual harvest, of which Christ was the first fruit, hasn't happened for 2,000 years and will not happen until the end of the Christian age, which is totally unrelated to the Old Covenant age. That is anachronism exemplified. I mean, it just simply doesn't work. What it does is it comes to passages like Matthew chapter 13, 39 and 40, in which Jesus tells the parable of the wheat and the tares, in which Jesus said harvest is at the end of the age. And we automatically, once again, assume, well, he's talking about the end of the Christian age. He's talking about the end of time. He's talking about the end of human history. And again, I was raised believing that. I was raised teaching that. But it absolutely skips over the harvest of the Old Covenant age. Now, I don't have time to go into this, but you have to understand that in the book of Hosea, Israel, 10 northern tribes, were planted in the earth, and Judah would be planted in the earth, and Judah would have a harvest just like Israel did. And that harvest would be at the time of the coming of, quote, King David, their king, in other words, Messiah, when Israel would be restored, but not under the Old Covenant form. She would be radically transformed into the image of Christ. But it would be the harvest of the Old Covenant age that would bring about that transformation. And I developed this in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. But for now, got to move on. All right. The question for today's video is, when does the Bible posit the fulfillment of Sukkot? Now, what I've said already should lead us to the proper conclusion. The fulfillment of Old Covenant Israel's feast day and feast days would not be at the end of an age in which those feast days were not applicable, in which those feast days were no longer pointing to the harvest, for instance. Why postulate such a dramatic dichotomization and divorce between the time of the fulfillment of the Old Covenant types and shadows and extrapolate that fulfillment to the end of an age unrelated? See, the so-called end of human history, as it is taught, is the end of the New Covenant age and the time of the fulfillment of New Covenant promises, or so we're told. No, the New Testament is more than clear, more than explicit, more than emphatic that the eschatology that is taught in the New Testament would be the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And of course, those promises in turn were the promises made to Adam onward until Moses came. Those eschatological promises were assimilated into Israel and became Israel's focus. Extremely important. So, once again, the question is, where does the Bible posit the fulfillment of Israel's feast days, and specifically Sukkot? Well, we've been focused on Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12 foretold the resurrection. Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall arise, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting condemnation. Folks, that's the harvest. That's Sukkot. That's Matthew chapter 13. That's 1 Thessalonians 4. That's 2 Corinthians 5. That's Revelation 14, about which we will have a good bit to say a bit later. But we've gone through Daniel chapter 12, 1 and following, I think sufficiently to prove that Daniel is not concerned with any end of time event. He has nothing whatsoever to say about the end of human history. He has nothing whatsoever to say, and I understand that because of preconceived ideas, we believe that he does nonetheless. He actually has nothing to say about the raising of physical bodies out of the dirt. He has nothing whatsoever to say about the transformation of human, physical, mortal, biological bodies transformed into immortal bodies. That is not the focus of Daniel chapter 12. Now, be sure to go to Now TV and be sure to watch my 5 videos on Abraham and the invisible resurrection. I'm going to be repeating some of that very soon, very quickly, very shortly, not 2,000 years. But in the meantime, go there and watch those videos. That's on Now TV. Just go to YouTube, look up Don K. Preston and Abraham and the Invisible Resurrection. I think it's going to blow you away. But for this morning's video, and I'm almost out of time, I want to focus on what Daniel chapter 12 has to say about the time for the resurrection. In other words, the time for the fulfillment of Sukkot. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Daniel chapter 12 is emphatic about where it places the resurrection. Now, before I get to those explicit statements, I want to notice again that many commentators say, well, Daniel chapter 12 is posited during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Men like John Collins tell us, Daniel chapter 12, we know he was a true prophet, because his prophecies failed. That's right. John Collins says the way we know that Daniel could be called a prophet is because his prophecy failed. Now that's quite a criteria, quite a standard for a prophet, isn't it? Oh yeah, the dude's an actual prophet. How do you know? Well, because his prophecies failed. Deuteronomy 18 has something to say about that. Yahweh said to Moses, if any man proposes to speak in my name, and he speaks of that which is to come, and if that which he speaks does not come to pass, I have not sent him. He is not spoken for me. He is not a prophet. So here's John Collins who says, the way that we know a man was a prophet is if his prophecies failed. And here's Moses saying, no, the way that we know a man was a true prophet if his prophecies came true. The definitions being set up by what I call secular commentators are simply false. So the posit that Daniel chapter 12 is talking about resurrection in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, what that does, these commentators are saying, yeah, Daniel was predicting literal physical resurrection of biologically dead human beings, but of course we know that didn't happen in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Therefore, Daniel's a true prophet, or an actual, I should say, prophet. Others try to escape the force of Daniel chapter 12 which we'll get to as we proceed this week, and say, well, the answer that was given for when those things will be fulfilled, uh, Preston is misconstruing what the text says. Really? Well, we'll investigate that on the flip side. I'll see you there.